Before we begin, I would just like to say Happy New Year. This show may contain adult language and themes. Listener discretion is advised. With that out of the way, let's start the show. You're listening to Murder is My Sign podcast, the true crime astrology podcast, and I'm your host, Jordy Death, here to light your way through the true crime astrology storm. Welcome to season 2, everybody. This season is all about compatibility. So we will be covering killer couples and deadly duos throughout the year. And I'm very excited about this and cannot wait to dive in. Now, this episode here, the first one of season 2, much like the first one of season 1, is just really kind of drawing a basis, going over the groundwork, the ground plans, the blueprint, whatever you want to call it. And it won't be too terribly long, and we'll just kind of be covering a little bit of things of what I hope to do over the course of the season. So, now that I kind of have a general list of people that I'll be covering, but I don't really have much of an idea or blueprint as to how this will all play out. Now, ideally, what I would like to do is focus on one killer couple or deadly duo each month, and then tell their story and talk about their signs and their compatibility over the course of that month. Kind of like what I did for Jeffrey Dahmer and Ed Gein in season 1, where their stories were covered in really good detail and things like that over the course of like multiple episodes. And I really want to kind of continue that this season because I thought that worked out really well last season with a couple of the episodes, because it kind of kept them, in a more manageable time frame between, 20 minutes to half an hour, even up to 45 minutes. But I want to keep them more detailed, but yet easily digestible, if that makes sense. And also my goal is to become more regular, as that sounds kind of weird. I am eating my fiber. I think I just threw in a unintentional poop joke in there. My goal is to release episodes each Friday. So I can get on a regular recording schedule and uploading schedule. But, we'll see how much that lasts or how long that lasts. And for my patrons on Patreon, I want to have these episodes done earlier for you guys. So if you are a patron, you get early access as one of the perks, as well as the shout outs and all that stuff. So again, kind of making this up as I go along, much like what I did last season, but yet holding myself accountable and trying not to get burnt out. And then that's, I think, for 2020, one of the things I really want to focus on is just not getting burnt out, yet, keeping myself accountable to my creative endeavors. So I'm really going to be taking a step back from Twitch and things like that, and YouTube and all that stuff. And not like I was like really big on that in the beginning anyways, but also social media. I still have all my social media accounts, but I'm just really sick of Facebook, my personal account at least. So I'm kind of like just putting that shit on the back burner, but I still have like my personal Facebook account, like page for the podcast and stuff like that. So you can definitely follow me on that. But like with anything, I'm going to kind of like sporadic. I mean, you guys will definitely know when I upload, because I always kind of mention that. But I feel like Facebook and some of the social medias are kind of, at least maybe with me and like my generation of the older millennials, kind of sort of on their way out. Like, I think we're just really sick of the negativity that's going on. So I don't know, maybe, I highly doubt I'm alone in that thought, but at this point I'm just like fucking rambling. So But yeah, with season 2, I also plan on continuing the side slices, maybe around at the end of each month. Again, I don't know how this will all pan out quite yet, but I really had a fun time recording with Lucas and Lanier and a bunch of other different people. And with those episodes, we've gotten really good feedback, and it's just super casual and light. And those episodes are easy to do and put together. And I'm all about convenience, especially, things like that. So, anywho, this episode, although it will be short, it will be our introduction into compatibility between zodiac signs and the general list of people that I wish to cover. So I will be using a lot of sources over this season, mainly books that I've acquired over the years of true crime and astrology, as well as compatibility books. Much of the same stuff that I used last season. I know there's a couple of documentaries out there now too, especially with some of the killers on the list that I'll be watching. So yeah, my biggest thing is just to not get burnt out on the true crime, because that's kind of what happened last year too. I really got to find that balance, and I've noticed with myself, like, things kind of come and go in cycles and in circles, like where I get like super hyper focused on one thing. And with all the different crafts and different hobbies that I have, it's like I'm hyper aware and hyper focused on one thing, and everything else kind of goes on the back burner. So like right now, I'm super hyper focused on getting this particular cross stitch that I've been working on since November done, because it's going to be a birthday present for a very good friend of mine, that I've kind of been putting, the podcast and stuff like that on hold. And my resin work and Twitch and streaming, all that stuff has been put on the back burner. Even my tarot stuff has been on the back burner. So I don't really know exactly what I need to do in this coming year to find that balance between all of it, so I'm not just really focusing on one thing. So if you guys have any tips on that, by all means, please let me know. Anywho, so the compatibility book that I've had for a very long time, that I really enjoy, that we'll be using a lot when it comes to the compatibility between the two signs, is called The Astro Twins Love Zodiac by Talia and Ofria Edut. E-D-U-T. I don't know how to pronounce it, but something like that. And it's kind of stupid because it says, this book is a guide for women. And the astrology guide, it's the essential astrology guide for women. And I'm like, really? You gotta be all like that? I mean, I know there's plenty of people out there who identify differently that are into this. So you know what? Don't let this book hold you back, even though it says it's the essential guide for women. If you identify differently and you want to read it, don't let this book stop you. It's 2020. You live your life, and don't let parameters like that fucking stop you. Anyhow, boy, I am super rambly today. So if you've been interested in astrology for any length of time, chances are that you've probably heard that certain signs get along better than other ones. Back in the day, like the 60s and 70s or whatever, it was considered like a pickup line to say, hey baby, what's your sign? And people wanted to know what your sign was, so they could kind of get a read on you and what your personality was. Oh, you're a Leo? I bet you love being the center of attention, and you really fuss over your hair more than anyone. You really want to make sure that your hair is looking on point. Or, you're Gemini? Well, I bet you're a great communicator, provided your evil twin hasn't taken over. Or you're a Scorpio? Goddamn, you all dark and moody, get away with your kinky fuckery. Or, better get closer. Whatever you're into. So we have all these different key personality traits with these signs, right? And, I covered this last season. But when it comes to compatibility, it's for example, why would a sensitive, sentimental sign like a Cancer try and go for a cooler air sign like Aquarius or Gemini, who traditionally squirm at being sentimental? I've been asking this question myself for years, since I seem to personally attract Cancer men like magnets. And ironically enough, I actually am currently dating a Cancer who I am very much in love with and care very deeply for. So, I'll probably be using Kyle and I as an example, I guess, of compatibility, of how things work and how things sometimes don't work throughout the season. So Sorry in advance if that annoys you guys. But the truth of the matter is, and this is such an important point that I really need you guys to really understand this and take this like to heart, is you can make it work with any sign. It does not matter. Any sign will work with any sign. It's just that some signs together require more of an effort than others when it comes to compatibility. All right? So just because traditionally your sign might not be compatible with another sign does not mean that that will not work out. It just requires more time, more understanding, more effort to make that work out, okay? Because I know a lot of you out there are probably going to be listening to this more on the compatibility aspect, more so than the true crime, probably. But let's keep this in mind that this isn't really a dating podcast. This is still a true crime podcast with astrology. This season's going to be more focused on the astrology aspect, though, for sure. So remember, again, last season, and I'm going to be alluding to a lot of stuff from last season. So please, if you're just joining us now, hi, welcome to the Boneyard. My name's Jordy Death. I'm just making this shit up as I go along. Please go ahead and take the time to listen to some of the episodes from last season. You don't need to listen to them like in any particular order, unless you're going for like the multiple episodes on one person, like Dahmer or Geen. You want to make sure you listen to those in order, but like you don't have to listen to the signs or the series in its entirety in that way. So like if you're a Cancer, you just want to listen to the Cancer episodes. If you're Aquarius, you just want to listen to the episodes, you can definitely do that. But it's not what do they call it? It's episodic. It's not a serial. I think do I have that right? Anywho, so last season, I kind of talked briefly about natal charts and how they're composed, of the planets and the houses and a lot of different things. So you need to remember, guys, that just because your sun signs may not be super compatible doesn't mean that your moon signs, which is your emotional self, or your Venus, which is your romantic self, aren't compatible. So remember, your natal chart is like a house or a book. Your sun sign is just one chapter or one room in that. It doesn't make up who you are or who your partner is in its entirety. So to drive this point even further, it should be said that just because you have a lot of friends who are one sign doesn't mean that they'll all behave the same way. I feel like that should be obvious. So, for example, myself, I am an Aquarius, and I have a lot of really good friends who are also Aquarians, such as Valerie, Michelle, and Jenny. And even though we're all Aquarians, we all have very different dominating personality traits that make us each unique and stand out in our own special ways. Now, of course, I'm looking at this from purely an astrological viewpoint, right? And as we discussed last season, psychology and how you're raised and, your genetic makeup, if you're predisposed to certain, physical or mental things, make up a huge part. So, it's kind of like a duh. But we're kind of looking at this from an astrological point, right? So your natal chart really does paint a full picture of who you are. You can't just be super hyper focused on one thing. Oh, the irony. Wasn't I just talking about how I'm always usually super focused on one hobby at a time? It's so funny. Everything seems to always come full circle. If you just wait long enough, everything always comes back around. So, anyway, I know I've talked a lot about compatibility already, but without really kind of getting into it. For the sake of this show, even though the killer couples and the deadly duos we will be covering, might not have necessarily been romantically involved with each other. That'll make itself more apparent when I get through the list of who we're talking about. For our sake in this show, we'll be looking at the compatibility between signs as love matches, because love is can be a very broad category. You can have romantic love, you can have platonic love, familial love. In this case, I think we're going to be focusing more on a romantic compatibility between people. But through each episode, when we cover different couples, we'll kind of be taking it as their as their own like relationships unfold as we discuss it. So again, going back to what I was saying in the beginning, kind of making this up as I go along, but generally when we're talking about compatibility between signs, it is more so on a romantic compatibility. So again, I keep bringing up compatibility, but what exactly does that mean, like, when it comes to signs? So, like, traditionally, so I'm an Aquarius, right? Traditionally, the best love matches for other Aquarians would be Geminis, which are air signs, Leo, fire signs, or other Aquarians. They say if you date someone who is the same sun sign as you, it's like almost like holding up a mirror to yourself, where you can see like a lot of the same characteristics, which can be, difficult yet rewarding in that sense, because it will really require you to grow. And I believe they talk about that more in depth in the Astro Twins books, because, you have the 12 signs of the zodiac, and they talk about like when you date like one sign over, or 4 signs, or you date the exact opposite sign. So the exact opposite sign on the wheel from Aquarius is Leo. So it's like opposites attract in that way, I suppose. For Pisces, best love matches for them would be Cancers, Scorpios, or Capricorns. And it's interesting because Pisces, being a water sign, also working well with water signs such as Cancer, Scorpio, and then Earth. So also, let's remember that water and earth signs are traditionally quote-unquote feminine signs, and air and fire signs are quote-unquote masculine signs. So I bet as we go through, the compatibility throughout this year and stuff like that, we'll notice that perhaps feminine signs work better together and masculine signs probably work better together. For Aries, traditionally love compatibilities would be Leos, Libras, and Sagittarians. So again, we see that duality working well together, with the same the same masculinity. Taurans, the bull, traditionally work very well with Cancers, Virgos, and Capricorns. And if you can hear I'm going through my little booklet right here, if you can hear the pages shifting. Geminis go really well with traditionally Aquarians, Libras, and Sagittarians. And I remember when I was working at the funeral home, I worked with quite a bit. I worked with a lot of Geminis, which kind of blew my mind. Really great in-depth conversations with them. I really do like Geminis, at least on a platonic level for sure. For Cancers, Taurans, Cancers, and Pisces work really well. And again, you see, signs of the same element doing pretty well together. Because I think with, especially like the water signs, with them being so emotionally driven, I think they could probably better understand their own element in that regard. Let's see. For Leos, traditionally they're really good with Aries, Libra, and Sagittarius. Interesting how Aquarians are good with Leos, but Leos probably aren't super great with Aquarians. I don't know. So that's some of the complexity that I want to kind of discover or find out more about throughout this season. For Virgos, Capricorn, Scorpios, and Tauruses do pretty well together. Capricorn and Taurus also being earth signs. And then for Libras, another air sign. Their love matches traditionally are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarians. And then working our way through Scorpio, Virgo, Capricorn, and Pisces. I'm a little surprised that, I guess not super surprised, but a little bit from the pattern that we've already kind of uncovered, that Cancers weren't a really big one for them. But then again, with how intense Scorpios traditionally are and how sensitive Cancers can be, I can definitely see them like having a little bit more friction than actually working really well together. Sagittarians traditionally do really well with Aries, Leo, and Libras. And then leads us into Capricorn, which traditionally, as an air sign, Capricorn as an earth sign works really well with Taurans, Virgos, and Pisces. And I've also heard that Capricorns work really well with Scorpios too. So, this is just one source. I was just using the birthday encyclopedia of elements. The element encyclopedia of birthdays, excuse me. I was using that, flipping through to see traditionally what the love matches for each sign were. And so as we go through, the couples and things like that, we'll kind of look at their charts together, who they were as an individual, and then their charts together, and see, what might be the magnetizing force, I suppose, that would draw them together. And then we'll also just kind of talk about generally what that sign sees in this other sign and vice versa. So that's kind of what I mean about compatibility. So, even though for me personally as an Aquarius, my track record with Cancer men has not always been very good in the long run. And I almost feel like I'm sabotaging myself or jinxing myself, but that's not really it. I'm not going to put much weight into that. But I know I've talked about this in last season, especially when I got into the Cancer episode, how, I had just gone through a string of really bad dates, or just dating, which ironically was all Cancer men, and they just never worked out very well for a multitude of reasons. Let me just preface that. Multitude of reasons. But even though with those Cancer men it did not work out, does not mean that it won't eventually work out with another Cancer or a different sign. So even if you are predisposed to just not like a particular sign because of your bad experiences with them, I feel like we all have that one thing, especially if you get more and more into astrology. You might have certain run-ins with Capricorns or Scorpios or Pisces, or it could be fellow signs. For me as an Aquarius, I have some friends that are Aquarians that I really love, but then I also meet some other Aquarians and I just kind of look at them and I'm like, how the fuck are you an Aquarian? You're a Virgo or a Capricorn. And it could be that their rising sign is very dominant in their chart, or, a whole slew of things, So remember, the natal chart paints the entire picture. You can't just focus on one thing and be oh my god, our sun signs aren't compatible, but yet we seem to work really well together. Well, it could be that your rising signs are very compatible, or you're emotionally very compatible, or romantically very compatible. Relationships take work. And this isn't even this is not a dating podcast. This is not what season 2 is going to be, even though I feel on the surface level it might be. So I guess in the roundabout way, what I was getting at is that even though I had gone on a string of really bad dates or had some really bad experiences with Cancers, when Kyle and I met and I eventually found out that his birthday made him a Cancer, I was a little bit cautious, but just knowing the connection that him and I shared almost instantaneously just really put my mind at ease, because dating him and being with him is one of the easiest things I think I've ever experienced in my dating in the last decade or whatever. And I tell him this all the time, just being with him is so reassuring and just so easy. And overall, guys, from the little bit I've talked about with other people who've been in long-term relationships, or with my mom who's a psychotherapist and all that stuff, is when you're dating someone, it should be easy. It shouldn't be a whole lot of work. It should be honest communication. It should be enjoying your time together. But it should not be difficult. You shouldn't have to put all these qualifiers on it. It should just be. It's that Beatles song, Let It Be, or fucking Frozen, Let It Go. It should just let it sit. Don't overthink it. Which I know personally, I am very apt to overthink a lot of things. So I know that's kind of very rambly, but Kyle is very patient with me, which is, you kind of sort of have to be, because that can be very neurotic sometimes. And he doesn't put any stock. He does not give a shit about any of this astrological stuff, but he supports me in my podcast and my hobbies and things like that. and we balance each other out a lot. And plus, he's one of the funniest people I know. So if you're out there listening and you are desperately single like I was, I've noticed that food and laughter seem to be the best ways to get to someone's heart. So, if you find someone, cook them, bake them something special, make them laugh, and, in no time you guys will be, enjoying being in love and being with each other. So, but again, like I said, this is not a dating advice podcast, although, if you're interested in that might be interesting to kind of talk about, either with my, my good friends or even Kyle. I mean, Kyle's mentioned that he's wanted to do a podcast with me. So we're kind of working out the kinks on that. But anywho, this is true crime. All right, let's get to the heart of the matter. Let's stab the heart of the matter, as it were. And let's get to the list of killer couples and deadly duos. But first, we're going to take a quick commercial break. And we're back. I know you guys probably find the ads really annoying, but just remember, every time you hear one, you're supporting me, you're supporting the show, and it really does mean a lot to me. So thank you so much for just taking the time to, and I try really hard to keep let me just preface by saying I have no control over what ads they put in here. All I know is that with my, with me being hosted on Sprecher, they have a beginning and an end roll, and then I'm responsible for the mid roll. So that's why I try to write in like a little bit of a break, and then they put in whatever, because it could be an ad for a different podcast, it could be for toothpaste, whatever. I have no control over what exactly they put in. At least not yet. All I just got to say is just thank you for bearing with me and for putting up with the ads. And I try really hard to limit it to just 3 in an episode. And I know they can get really annoying, but every time you hear one, it is me getting a little bit, just like literally pennies, but it all adds up. So it helps support me in the show. So enough about that. I'm sure you guys are sick about ads. Let's get to this list. So here is a list that I created myself using a few of the sources that I already have at home. So the 2 books that really helped me curate this list were the 101 People You Won't Meet in Heaven by Michael Powell and Deadly Duos by Paul Rowland. So I used the 101 People book a lot in the last season, and one of the reasons why I really like this book is that it actually provides the birth dates of the people listed within it. And it's not just all serial killers. Like, they have dictators in there, they have a lot of really bad people, which is, why it's called 101 People You Won't Meet in Heaven. So I noticed within that book, though, they had a bunch of like pairings or couples or duos together. And then with their birthdays being in that book made it really easy for me to cross-reference and get a lot of information that I would need to compile lists for the future episodes. And so I just kind of used those 2 books to see who was in each book. And then the 101 Duos has about 7 or 8 couples, I think. And I wrote them all down and I cross-referenced them, and I did the research to make sure I could find and verify a bunch of stuff. And so originally on my list, I had about 12 different couples. However, near the end of the list, because the 101 People book only had like 7 or 8 people, the Deadly Duos book has a lot more people. But the three or 4 different couples that I found to help round out the list to 12, because ideally I want to do like 1 couple per month, I had issues. I couldn't find the full information that I need to do a birth chart. So when you do a natal chart on someone, you need to have the location of where they were born and their full birth date, and ideally the time. But the time really isn't like super important. The time will help you find like your houses and like your ascendant and some other things, which is probably a little too much information that what we need here for the show. But if you're ever curious to do your own personal chart, if you can find out the time of day you were born, that will help a lot. So yeah, the last 3 couples on the list I compiled, I had an issue with finding their complete birth date information. So for season 2 of Murder Is My Sign, here is the list of the killer couples and deadly duos that I plan on covering. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the order that I give them in is the order that they will be covered this year, but this is just how I wrote them out. Okay, so Bonnie and Clyde, they're a classic couple. And they will actually be the first couple I go with. So the next episode you hear will be the introduction of Bonnie and Clyde. Let's see. And then Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. They're considered the Ken and Barbie killers. And then Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono, known as the Hillside Stranglers. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the Columbine killers. Ian Bradley and Myra Hindley, the child killers. Charles Nigg and Leonard Lake, Death Factory. And Henry Lee Lucas and Otis O'Toole, the serial killer cannibals. Now, Henry Lee Lucas was also on the original list in season 1, but they are not listed in the Deadly Duo book. They are only listed in my 101 People book. And then Henry Lee Lucas is listed by himself in a couple of other sources I have, and I know that Netflix, I think, just did a documentary on him, so I will be focusing on them down the road, but I think that's going to be a really interesting episode or series. And then Fred and Rosemary West, Mommy and Daddy Dearest, family killers. They're really fucking sick. I mean, all the people on this list are really fucking sick. With the exception of probably Bonnie and Clyde, like they're more like gangsters, runaways than they were actually killers. But yeah, I mean, it's true crime. All these people are terrible people. So those are the 8 couples that I plan on covering this season. And I think that is going to be more than sufficient to get us through the year. But if you're curious about the 3 couples that I wrote down but could not find complete birth information, they were Douglas Clark and Carol Bundy, Martha Beck and Raymond Fernandez, and Gwendolyn Graham and Catherine Wood. So if you're listening and you happen to find complete information on these folks, by all means, please email the show at murderismysignpodcast@gmail.com and let me know. But yeah, so that's basically the gist of the season and what I hope to get through and accomplish this year. So that's really all that I have for this episode, for season 2. So I know it's not like super exciting, but at least you folks out there have a general idea of where the season is heading and what to expect. If you're interested in following me on social media, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, and I have a Facebook page dedicated to the show. It's all at Jordy Death. It's JORDY Death. Please be sure to share Murder Is My Sign with anyone you can, any way that you can. You can find the show on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon, or your favorite podcast app. And really, by sharing this show, it helps me grow and expand, and it's a win-win, you know. And I appreciate every single one of you guys out there listening. I really, really do. Thank you guys so much for your continued support, and thank you so much for listening. I will catch you all next week as we kick off the series with Bonnie and Clyde. Until then, Happy New Year, take care of yourself and each other, and rest in peace.